2.5 years ago, American democracy came perilously close to succumbing to Donald Trump's autocratic demands. And if it weren't for one man, Vice President Mike Pence, and his decision to certify the vote for Joe Biden, refusing to do as his boss ordered him to do, we might be in a very different place right now. For more on this, I'm joined by the man who advised Mike Pence of his constitutional responsibility and duty on that day, Judge J. Michael Luttig. He's a former federal judge in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, and he's a friend of our show. Judge, good morning to you. Good to see you.
Good morning, Ali. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Judge, in response to the news regarding Donald Trump receiving this target letter from Jack Smith, you put out a statement last week that read, quote, "There is not an attorney general or special counsel of either party who would not bring charges against the former president for his efforts on January 6th to overturn the 2020 presidential election. He has dared, taunted, provoked, and goaded the Department of Justice to prosecute him for his offenses on and relating to January 6th for 2.5 years. The former president has left Jack Smith no choice but to bring charges, lest the former president make a mockery of the Constitution of the United States and the rule of law." End quote. You believe that these are necessary charges almost independently of Donald Trump, but really for the preservation of democracy.
I do, Ali. The former president will now apparently be indicted and prosecuted for his efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election and also for the attack on the United States Capitol on January 6th. These are the gravest offenses against the United States that a president could commit, with the possible exception of treason itself. These offenses, though, partake of the betrayal of America that is the essence of treason. Neither this indictment nor the indictment over the classified documents would have ever come to pass if the former president had not wanted and forced Jack Smith and the Department of Justice to prosecute him. On any given day over the past 2.5 years, Donald Trump could have avoided and prevented these prosecutions. He didn't want to. He wanted to be indicted and prosecuted for his conduct on January 6th. So instead, for 2.5 years, he dared, taunted, and provoked both DOJ and eventually Jack Smith to indict him. And finally, Jack Smith had no choice but to indict the former president, lest he make a mockery out of the Constitution and the rule of law. The Republicans are as responsible for these indictments as Donald Trump is himself. Their unwavering support for Donald Trump since January 6th convinced him of his political immortality. And in the meantime, they also convinced him that he could recapture the White House in 2024 on their behalf.
On Twitter, since I've got an eminent jurist like yourself, I want to ask you about this. On Twitter, you had some words of caution about one of the statutes that is reportedly cited in the target letter. We, of course, have not seen the target letter ourselves, so we are relying on other reporting. But it's Title 18, Section 241, and it relates to the deprivation of rights. Now, that one came as a bit of a surprise for some analysts, and it wasn't one of the charges that was included in the Congressional January 6th Committee's criminal referral. You wrote that we just can't speculate about it. What do you mean by that, and what's your concern about this particular statute, Title 18, Section 241?
This is very sensitive, Ali, and I don't know what the Department of Justice is thinking or Jack Smith is thinking, and there was a lot of speculation out there about what they were about to do. I tweeted that to make the point that I made, which is we don't know, and we can't even rationally speculate as to what Jack Smith and the Department of Justice are thinking and thinking about doing. Now, in response to all of the traffic, in the media and on Twitter about the Section 241 possible charge. I did want to simply make the point, and the only point, that there would be a very serious question whether Donald Trump intimidated the voters of America or intimidated the state election officials, such as the secretaries of state, depriving them of their right to vote. There is not a constitutional right to vote, but I just wanted to pose that question for all of those who were speculating, and of course, indirectly to the Department of Justice. But I have no earthly idea what the Department of Justice is thinking, and neither does anyone else, Allie.
Last month, Judge, you wrote an op-ed for the New York Times shortly after Donald Trump was federally indicted in the classified documents case. The essay is called "It's Not Too Late for the Republican Party," in which you had strong words for Republicans. You said, quote, "In a word, the Republicans are as responsible as Mr. Trump for this month's indictment and will be as responsible for any indictment and prosecution of him for January 6th. One would think that for a party that has prided itself for caring about the Constitution and the rule of law, this would stir some measure of self-reflection among party officials and even voters about their abiding support for the former president. But by all appearances, it certainly hasn't occurred to them yet that any reckoning is needed," end quote. These are tough words for you and from you because you are a conservative. You have been a Republican for all of your life. Do you think anyone's listening to those words? Do you think some Republicans are coming around to the idea that they need to be on the right side of this?
As we sit here today, Allie, there's no evidence whatsoever that the Republican Party and the Republican politicians cared one whit about what I said, and nor should they, frankly. They should be thinking this themselves. Neither I nor anyone else should have to tell them this. But still today, there is not a single Republican candidate who is running for the Republican nomination today who is running against Donald Trump, except for Governor Chris Christie. At this point, Governor Chris Christie just happens to be the first Republican politician of any note who is challenging Donald Trump for the presidency of the United States. Time will tell whether any of the other Republican candidates for the White House will challenge the former president. I doubt it at this point. They are all in with Donald Trump as a result of their 2.5 years of support for him, specifically over his conduct in and around January 6th, Allie.
And we've heard from Will Hurd and Asa Hutchinson, who also seem to be pushing back on Donald Trump. But your point is that most of the pack, including the guy who's running in the third position, it's a very distant third, but Mike Pence is sort of third in most of the polling at this point. This is a guy who consulted with somebody who consulted with you and ended up doing the right thing on January 6th. History will judge that he was on the right side of that issue. And yet he still seems tentative about pushing back on Donald Trump as it relates to these charges and the prosecution of Donald Trump for his interference in the 2020 election. Does that surprise you, given that he did reach out?
Allie, the vice president's, that issue with respect to the vice president's, none of my concern and none of my business. He is a former vice president of the United States running for the presidency of the United States today, and he can manage his campaign perfectly well without any comment from me.
Well said, sir. Good to see you, Judge. As always, we appreciate your time. Judge J. Michael Luttig is a former federal judge of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit and a very good friend of our show. Thank you, sir. Have a great day.
Thank you, Allie.